The mysterious encounter. The sun was setting over the distant, war-torn planet of Volcarus, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape. The air was thick with smoke, remnants of battles fought for years. The human soldier, Sergeant Michael Grant, crouched low behind a pile of debris, scanning the horizon through his advanced combat goggles. His mission was clear: infiltrate the enemy's stronghold, retrieve critical intelligence, and return home. But nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to encounter. As Grant moved through the ruins, his heart raced. The silence of the desolate land seemed unnatural. It was too quiet, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. His footsteps echoed in the emptiness. He knew the enemy had eyes everywhere, but there was no sign of them, just the eerie stillness. Suddenly, his comlink buzzed in his ear. "Grant, do you copy? You're getting close to the target area. Proceed with caution." "Copy that," Grant replied, his voice steady despite the tension building in his chest. His fingers tightened around the rifle slung across his back. But before he could move forward, something caught his eye, a flicker of movement in the distance. At first he thought it was just a trick of the light, but then he saw it again. Something or someone was moving, half hidden among the ruins. He cautiously crept closer, his heart pounding louder with each step. The shadows stretched longer as the sun dipped lower, but there, just beyond the wreckage of a shattered building, he saw her. A figure, tall, with long, flowing hair that shimmered like molten gold in the fading sunlight. She was standing alone, her back to him, radiating the heat so intense that the air around her shimmered. Her skin, fiery, almost glowing, was unlike anything he had ever seen. It looked like it could burn through metal, like the sun itself had been trapped in her veins. Grant froze, not sure whether to approach or retreat. He had heard rumors of alien species with powers beyond human understanding, but he had never expected to encounter something like this. Her presence felt like a storm about to break, but the strange pull he felt towards her was undeniable. It was as though something inside him recognized her, even though he had never seen her before. She turned slightly, her glowing eyes meeting his gaze. There was no surprise in her expression, no fear, only something else, something ancient, and perhaps a little sad. Grant's heart skipped a beat. Was she waiting for him? "Who are you?" he called out, his voice low but steady, unsure of what kind of being he was addressing. The princess, the figure, did not answer. Instead, she raised one hand slowly, and the air around them seemed to thicken. A ripple of heat surged outward, causing the ground beneath him to crack and shift. Grant instinctively stepped back, but he couldn't look away. His mission was to gather intel, not to get involved in something he couldn't understand. But the sight of her, the power she seemed to command, the mystery of her very existence, it all made him feel something deep inside, something that overpowered his military training. What was she? Why was she here, in the ruins of this forsaken planet? And why was he drawn to her in a way that made no sense at all? The soldier's hand instinctively reached for his weapon, but before he could decide whether to approach or retreat, something unexpected happened. A deep voice, not from the princess, but from the air itself, echoed through the ruins. "She is not what you think," the voice said, "and neither are you." Grant's mind raced. Who had spoken? And what did that mean? Suddenly, the figure, the princess, took a step forward, her fiery skin illuminating the darkening landscape. The temperature around them rose sharply, and Grant could feel the heat on his face. He had to decide, should he run, or should he step into the unknown? Before he could make a move, she locked eyes with him again. And this time, there was no mistaking it. She wasn't just looking at him. She was calling to him. Something in his gut told him this was no ordinary encounter. This wasn't part of the mission. This was something more. But what was it? The world seemed to hold its breath as the princess raised her hand once more, and the heat from her skin intensified. The air crackled. And just like that, in the blink of an eye, everything around them went still. And then she spoke. You will not leave without me. The princess's mysterious power. The words echoed in the air, like a command that shook the very ground beneath Sergeant Grant's boots. You will not leave without me. The alien princess, standing before him with her fiery skin blazing in the twilight, seemed to be more than just a prisoner or a captive. There was power in her words, an undeniable force. Grant's pulse quickened. He had seen unimaginable things during his years of service, but nothing had prepared him for this. Every instinct told him to retreat, to follow the mission's orders. But something about her, her strength, her gaze, kept him rooted to the spot. The air around her seemed to hum with energy, as if her very presence defied the laws of nature. Why? Grant asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the overwhelming heat surrounding them. Why do you need me? The princess didn't answer at first. Instead, she looked up at the sky, her expression distant, as if remembering something far away. Her eyes glowed with a fiery intensity that matched the heat emanating from her skin. She took a deep breath, and for a moment, the fire in her seemed to fade just enough for her voice to reach him without the oppressive heat. My name is Princess Amara of the Infernians, she began. Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it, as if every word carried a weight of centuries. I am the last of my kind, the last of a race born from the heart of stars. My people, we wield the power of fire, of destruction, and of rebirth. But my power is also my curse. Grant watched, transfixed, as the princess's hand moved gently through the air, and a small flame danced above her palm. It was unlike any fire Grant had seen before. It flickered, its colors shifting from deep red to golden orange, to blue as if it held the essence of the very sun itself. She continued, I was once destined to rule, to lead my people back to glory. But my power, it is uncontrollable. Those who sought to use me for their own purposes chained me here, hoping to harness my flame as a weapon. But they underestimated me. And now, I am trapped. Her voice wavered with a touch of sadness, and for the first time, Grant saw a glimpse of vulnerability in her fiery eyes. It wasn't just the raw power she wielded. It was the weight of her responsibility, her isolation. The princess, powerful and feared as she was not as invincible as she seemed. Grant stepped closer, despite the heat pressing against his skin, despite the danger. He didn't know what drove him to stay, but it felt as though the universe itself was pushing him into this moment. Why me? He asked again, his voice softer this time. What do you want with me? Amara's gaze fixed on him. The air between them crackled as her fire seemed to burn even hotter. But her eyes, those intense, glowing eyes, held something more. You're different, human, she said. I can sense it in you. The fire within me. It calls to something within you. You may not understand it yet, but I need your help to escape. Together, we can destroy the ones who have held me captive. Grant was still processing everything. A princess with the power of fire, an entire race destroyed, and now he was somehow the key to her freedom. It felt impossible, like a dream that couldn't be real. But the tension in the air, the heat on his skin, it was too real to ignore. What are they planning? He asked, trying to focus on the mission. Who are these people you're talking about? Amara's face hardened. They are the Zorathians, an empire that seeks to dominate the galaxy. They are ruthless, calculating, and they believe that my power can tip the balance of the war in their favor. But they will never understand my true potential. They think I am just a weapon. Grant's mind raced. The Zorathians. He had heard of them before, ruthless invaders with no mercy for anyone who stood in their way. And now, their target was the last of a dying race, a princess with power so immense it could change the fate of entire worlds. You're right, Grant said, gripping his weapon tighter. They won't understand you. Amara's fiery gaze softened, and for a moment, the temperature around them seemed to lower, though not by much. I do not need them to understand. I need you to help me escape. Only you can help me unleash my true power. Together, we can end this war and free my people from the Zorathians once and for all." The weight of her words hit Grant like a hammer. This wasn't just a rescue mission. This was a battle for the survival of an entire race, a struggle for freedom, and the power to fight against an empire that had already destroyed so much. As he looked into Amara's glowing eyes, something in his chest burned with the same intensity as the fire surrounding her. He had a choice to make. He could walk away, continue his mission, and leave her to her fate. Or he could stay, and in doing so, risk everything to stand by her side. The decision was clear. "I'll help you," Grant said, his voice unwavering. "But we're doing this my way." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Amara's lips. "Then let's begin." The heat between them flared once more as the first step towards their shared destiny was taken. The human's choice. Sergeant Grant's mind raced as he turned away from the alien princess. His decision was made, but the weight of it pressed heavily on his chest. He had just chosen to throw away his mission, the one that brought him here in the first place, to help a princess with fiery powers escape a deadly empire. He had no idea what he was getting into, no idea of the depths of power the princess truly held or the dangers that awaited them both. They moved swiftly through the ruins, Amara leading the way, her glowing skin lighting their path. Every step they took was like a journey into the unknown. The landscape, once ravaged by war, now felt like a maze of forgotten memories, as if the planet itself had been abandoned by time. The soldier could feel the tension rise, each moment stretching longer as they ventured deeper into hostile territory. Grant's hand was never far from his weapon, and he kept his senses sharp, every step calculated. The heat around him made it hard to focus, but his training kicked in. He had dealt with the most dangerous enemies in the galaxy, but this was different. He wasn't fighting for a cause or a mission anymore. He was fighting to protect someone who, despite being an alien, seemed more human to him than he ever imagined. "Do you know where we're going?" Grant asked, trying to break the tension. His voice was low, but there was a hint of unease in it. Amara glanced over her shoulder at him. "I know the general direction. We need to reach the hidden temple at the heart of this planet. There, my true power can be unlocked, but I can't go alone. Not without you." Grant didn't respond right away. There was something strange about the way she spoke, like she was saying more than just the words. She needed him, but why? Why did it have to be a human? The princess's power, the fire that radiated from her, was more than just physical. It was something ancient, something far beyond the comprehension of any of the humans Grant had ever known. It made him wonder, was he being used? Or was there something more, something that tied him to her destiny in a way that defied all logic? He pushed the doubts from his mind. He was here now. There was no turning back. He could already hear the faint sounds of enemy movement in the distance. They were being hunted. "We need to move faster," Grant said, his voice low but urgent. "The Zorathians will have their scouts all over this place. If we don't stay ahead, they'll catch us before we reach that temple." Amara nodded, her expression becoming more serious. The heat in the air seemed to increase, and her fiery skin shimmered brighter with each step. "They're already close. We won't have much time." Suddenly, there was a rustling sound from the shadows. Grant froze, instinctively raising his rifle. His eyes scanned the surroundings, but the moment he did, a flash of movement appeared, and before he knew it, something struck him from behind. He went down hard, his rifle slipping from his hands. His heart raced as he rolled to the side, instinctively getting back on his feet. But his attacker wasn't a human soldier. It was one of the Zorathians. A hulking figure, clad in dark armor, stood in front of him. The Zorathian soldier was massive, towering over Grant with weapons drawn. The air seemed to vibrate with the energy of the alien's presence. The enemy soldier's helmet glinted in the dim light, his eyes hidden beneath a mask, but the sheer force of his stance radiated power. Grant didn't hesitate. He lunged for his weapon, grabbing it just as the Zorathian charged. The battle was quick but brutal. Grant's military training kicked in as he blocked and dodged the alien strikes, each blow more powerful than the last. Sweat dripped from his brow, his muscles straining under the pressure. But just as the fight seemed to tip in his favor, the Zorathian swung a heavy blade toward Grant's chest. Time slowed as Grant saw the strike coming, but it was too late to avoid it. The blade connected, slicing through the air with a deafening crack. Grant braced for impact, only to be thrown aside by a wave of heat so intense it singed the air. Amara had acted. The Zorathian soldier froze mid-swing, his weapon now a glowing ember in his hands as the princess unleashed a torrent of flame. The heat engulfed the enemy soldier, and within moments he crumbled to the ground, his armor melting from the intense fire. Grant gasped, staring at the smoldering remains of the Zorathian. The force of the blast was enough to knock him backward. But Amara stood unwavering. Her fiery skin shimmered brighter, her body pulsating with power. "That's the Zorathians for you," she said coolly, her eyes flicking to Grant. "They never understand true power." Grant stood in stunned silence, catching his breath. He had always known the princess was powerful, but seeing her fire in action, it was beyond anything he had ever imagined. She was not just an ally. She was a weapon. But there was something unsettling about it, too. The way her power had just incinerated the Zorathian. The ease with which she did it. It made him wonder, what if she couldn't control it? What if he was putting his trust in someone who had the power to destroy everything in her path? Still, he had made his choice. And now, there was no turning back. "We need to keep moving," Grant said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We'll be on the move until we reach that temple." Amara nodded without a word, and together, they vanished into the shadows of the ruins, a bond formed in fire and danger. But as the Zorathian threat loomed in the distance, Grant couldn't shake the feeling that their real battle had only just begun, and the choices he had made would soon test not only his bravery but his very survival. Escape into the unknown. The pursuit was relentless. Sergeant Grant and Princess Amara moved through the desolate landscape with all the speed they could muster. The air was thick with the scent of burnt earth, and every step felt like they were being drawn deeper into a maze of shadows and dangers. The Zorathians were closing in fast. The sound of their engines reverberated in the distance as the alien forces hunted them down. Amara's fiery glow illuminated the path ahead, but it also made them easy to track. Grant's heart raced as he glanced over his shoulder. The distant hum of Zorathian ships was growing louder. They had no time to waste. "Which way?" Grant asked, his voice tight with urgency. Amara's eyes flicked to the horizon. "We need to cross the wastes. It's a dangerous place, but it's the quickest route to the temple. If we're lucky, the Zorathians won't be able to track us through the storms there." Grant didn't hesitate. He knew they had no other choice. The wastes were a vast, uncharted desert known for its fierce, unrelenting sandstorms. Few dared to cross it, and even fewer returned. But it was the only way to avoid detection. They began their trek toward the wastes, the ground beneath them shifting from rocky terrain to barren desert. The wind picked up, carrying the first signs of a sandstorm in the distance. The storm would provide them some cover, but it would also be a challenge. Amara's fiery glow would make it difficult to hide, and Grant's body was already feeling the strain of the journey. As they moved, Grant couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air was thick with tension, and the heat from Amara's skin seemed to grow stronger with every step. He had to be careful. Her power was incredible, but he still didn't understand it fully. She was unpredictable, and that made her dangerous. "How do we know this temple is real?" Grant asked, trying to distract himself from the growing unease. "How do you know it will help you unlock your power?" Amara's gaze softened as she turned to face him. The wind whipped at her fiery hair, but she remained unflinching. "I've seen the temple in my visions. It's been passed down through my people for generations. My ancestors built it as a place of strength, a place where the true power of our race could be unlocked. But only one with the blood of the Infernians can access it. I need you to help me, Grant. Without you, I'll never reach my full potential." Her words were heavy with meaning, and despite the danger, Grant felt a strange sense of resolve settle in his chest. He couldn't deny the truth in her voice. She needed him, and somehow he felt that he needed her too. But the more he learned about her, the more questions arose. What did it truly mean to unlock her full power? What would it cost? They pressed on, the storm closing in around them. The wind howled, picking up sand and debris, making it harder to see. Grant adjusted his goggles, trying to keep his vision clear, but the storm was unforgiving. The ground beneath them shifted with each step, and the temperature dropped rapidly. It wasn't just the sand that made the waste dangerous. It was the way the environment seemed to fight back. In the distance, the faint outline of a mountain range began to appear through the haze of the storm. "We're getting close," Amara said, her voice barely audible above the wind. "The temple is hidden within those mountains. We must hurry." But just as they began to push forward with renewed determination, a sudden, piercing sound echoed through the storm. The hum of alien engines, growing louder by the second. "They found us," Grant said, his voice cold with realization. "They've tracked us." Amara's eyes flared with fiery intensity as she turned to face the approaching threat. "We need to make it to the mountains. Once we reach the temple, we can stand a chance." Grant knew she was right, but the enemy was closing in fast. They had no time to waste. The Zorathians were relentless. Their forces were vast, and now they were on their heels, ready to strike. "Run!" Grant shouted, and without another word, they both surged forward into the storm, their path now a desperate dash toward the only hope they had, the hidden temple in the mountains. But the Zorathians weren't the only danger. As they neared the base of the mountains, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and a deep, rumbling sound echoed through the desert. It wasn't a sandstorm. It was something else, something much more terrifying. Amara's eyes widened in fear. "We need to hurry, Grant. The temple is not just a place of power, it's also a trap. If we're not careful, we'll be consumed by it." Grant barely had time to process her warning when the ground split open beneath them. The earth itself seemed to fight against them as massive chasms appeared, threatening to swallow them whole. The storm raged around them, and the mountains loomed ominously in the distance, as if daring them to come closer. The Zorathians were closing in, but now there was a new threat. The desert itself seemed alive, shifting, moving, fighting to keep them from reaching their destination. With no time to waste, Grant grabbed Amara's hand, pulling her along as they sprinted towards the mountains, their path becoming more treacherous with each passing second. The storm howled, the ground cracked beneath them, and the sound of the Zorathians' engines grew louder in the distance. They were running out of time, and the world around them was beginning to collapse. But there was no turning back. The temple was their only hope. They had to make it. The growing bond. As they raced through the storm and towards the mountains, every step felt like a battle against time. The ground was shifting beneath them, cracking open like an ancient wound that refused to heal. The Zorathians were hot on their trail, their engines roaring louder with each passing second. Yet, the true danger wasn't just the soldiers chasing them. It was the relentless force of the desert itself, and the unknown horrors hidden within the mountains. Grant's breath came in ragged gasps, the cold sand stinging his face as he sprinted alongside Amara. Despite her fiery aura lighting their path, the storm was so thick they could barely see 5 feet ahead. The howling winds whipped around them, and the desert floor beneath their feet seemed to move, as if the earth itself was trying to swallow them whole. But through the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. As they ran, their footsteps synchronized, their movements aligned. There was an unspoken connection that seemed to grow with every moment. Grant couldn't explain it. He had only just met Amara, yet it felt as if they had known each other forever. It wasn't just the way she moved, graceful and determined, despite the chaos around them. It was something deeper, something that pulled them together like a force of nature. She was not just a princess with terrifying power. She was more than that. She was becoming a partner in this fight, someone he could rely on. Amara's fiery skin flickered and pulsed, lighting up the darkened landscape, but she was beginning to look more tired, her energy visibly drained. Grant saw the strain on her face, the tension in her posture. She had been using her fire for hours, and it was taking a toll on her. "Are you all right?" Grant asked between breaths, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could hear the engines of the Zorathians coming closer, but his focus shifted to Amara's strained expression. Amara nodded but didn't speak. She kept pushing forward, her determination shining through despite her weariness. But Grant could see it in her eyes. She was close to her limits. The fire within her, though powerful, required more than just physical strength. It drew from something deeper, something inside her that was connected to her people and their ancient powers. "You need to rest," Grant said, his voice firm. "We can't keep going like this. We need to regroup, even if it's just for a moment." Amara shook her head. "We don't have time. The Zorathians are too close. If we stop now, they'll catch us before we reach the temple." Grant didn't argue. He could feel the urgency in her words, but something inside him told him she was pushing herself too hard. If they didn't make it to the temple, they were both doomed. "Listen to me," he said, grabbing her arm to slow her down. "We can't win if you burn yourself out. I need you at your best. We both do." Amara paused, looking at him with an intensity that made him feel as if he were being scrutinized by something ancient and wise. For a long moment, she didn't speak, and Grant wondered if she would push him away. But then, slowly, she nodded. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice tinged with something Grant couldn't quite place. "I have never had to rely on someone else like this. I've always been alone, carrying the weight of my people's power." Grant's grip on her arm softened, and he took a step back. For the first time since they had met, he saw a crack in her facade. Amara, the powerful princess who had seemed invincible, was just as human as he was. She wasn't invulnerable, and her power came with a price. It was a burden she had carried alone for too long. "We're in this together," Grant said, his voice steady. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore. I'm not leaving you." For the briefest of moments, Amara's fiery glow seemed to dim, and she looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. Then, with a quiet sigh, she closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of rest. The wind still howled around them, but the moment felt oddly peaceful in the midst of the storm. "We're almost there," she said after a moment. "The temple lies beyond these mountains. We just have to push through." Grant nodded, taking a deep breath and scanning their surroundings. He knew they didn't have much time. The Zorathians were too close, but the bond between them had shifted. He had given her the chance to rest, to trust him, and in return, she had shared a part of herself with him that no one else had seen. As they continued onward, the storm began to let up slightly. The wind died down, and the temperature dropped, but they could see the looming outline of the mountains ahead. The temple, hidden in the heart of the peaks, was so close now. But just as they reached the base of the mountains, a sharp metallic roar echoed from behind them. The Zorathian forces had arrived. Their ships hovered overhead, casting shadows across the land. The Zorathian commander's voice crackled through the air, amplified by the ship's loudspeaker. "Princess Amara, you cannot escape. Surrender now, or face destruction." Grant's grip tightened around his weapon, and Amara's fire flared brighter, more intense. She was ready for this fight, ready to face her enemies. But as she looked at Grant, something flickered in her eyes. A trust, a shared resolve. This wasn't just about saving her people. This was about fighting for their freedom, for their futures, and for the bond that had been forged in the heat of battle. The real fight was just beginning. "We're not surrendering," Grant said, his voice resolute. "We're making our stand here." Amara's fire blazed with renewed intensity as she turned towards the mountains, her path clear. They would face the Zorathians together, and nothing would stop them now. The moment had arrived. The temple awaited, and with it, their destiny. But the path forward would not be easy. The Zorathians were relentless, and time was running out. But whatever happened, Grant and Amara would fight side by side. The battle for survival had begun, and neither of them would back down. The final confrontation. The ground trembled as the Zorathian ships hovered ominously overhead, casting their massive shadows across the landscape. The Zorathians had found them, and they were ready to strike. Grant could feel the weight of the situation pressing on his chest as the heavy hum of the ships filled the air. They were surrounded, but there was no turning back now. The temple was just beyond the mountains, but they had to fight their way through the Zorathian forces first. Amara stood tall beside him, her fiery skin flickering with intensity, her eyes burning with determination. Grant could feel the heat radiating from her, almost as if her very presence was a shield against the Zorathians' weapons. Her power was unimaginable, and yet even she knew that the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. "They're coming," Grant said, his voice firm, as the first of the Zorathian soldiers began to descend from their ships, weapons drawn. Amara nodded, her gaze focused. "We fight here, and we fight to win. But we must reach the temple. It's the only way." Grant's heart raced. The Zorathians weren't just any enemy. They were relentless, skilled, and their numbers seemed endless. But Amara's power, her fire, could level the battlefield. If she could control it, if they worked together, they might have a chance. The Zorathians advanced, and Grant's hand tightened around his weapon. He knew what had to be done. This wasn't just about protecting Amara anymore. It was about fighting for everything they stood for: freedom, survival, and hope. Without warning, the Zorathians opened fire. A barrage of plasma blasts filled the air, the sound of their weapons deafening. Grant dove for cover, pulling Amara with him as explosions erupted around them. The ground shook, and the heat from the blasts made the air thick with smoke. But Amara didn't flinch. She rose to her feet, her fiery aura flaring, as she unleashed a wave of intense fire that sent the first wave of Zorathians scrambling for cover. "Stay close," Grant shouted, as they darted from one piece of cover to the next. The Zorathians were regrouping, their soldiers moving in carefully, trying to outmaneuver them. But Grant could feel it. The Zorathians weren't just after Amara anymore. They were after her power. They knew that if they captured her, they could control the entire galaxy. The stakes were higher than ever. They couldn't afford to let that happen. Amara turned to him, her eyes blazing with the fire of determination. "I can do this, Grant," she said. "But I need your help. You're the key." Grant hesitated. He had no idea how he could be the key, but he knew one thing: she needed him, and he wouldn't let her down. He had to fight, not just for himself, but for her, for everything they had fought for up until this point. "I'm with you," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. He didn't know how, but somehow they were going to make it. Together. As Amara unleashed another devastating wave of fire, the Zorathians tried to retaliate, but they were no match for her power. The ground around them began to glow from the heat, the air shimmering with the intensity of her flames. The Zorathians scrambled to regroup, but Grant and Amara moved as one, their every step calculated, their actions synchronized. The bond between them had grown, and now it was their greatest weapon. But as the battle raged on, the real test was still to come. A Zorathian warlord emerged from the shadows, his massive form clad in black armor, his eyes glowing with malice. He was the one who had been hunting them, the one who sought to capture Amara and harness her power for himself. His presence on the battlefield was like a dark cloud, and the Zorathians rallied behind him, knowing that with him in command, victory was within reach. "I am Commander Zorath," the warlord bellowed, his voice amplified by the helmet he wore. "Surrender now, and I will spare your lives." Amara's eyes narrowed, her fists clenched. "I will never surrender to you." Zorath laughed, the sound echoing across the battlefield. "Then you will die, princess, and your precious human will fall with you." He raised his weapon, a massive energy cannon that crackled with power. In that instant, Grant knew that the Zorathians weren't just trying to kill them. They were trying to destroy everything they stood for, everything Amara had fought for. But Amara wasn't going down without a fight. With a fierce roar, she unleashed her full power, the flames around her growing larger, brighter, hotter. She reached out, her hand glowing with energy, and in a flash of light, the ground beneath them erupted into an inferno. Zorath's weapon was obliterated in an instant, and his soldiers were sent flying, their armor melting from the heat. But the warlord himself wasn't so easily defeated. He charged forward, his massive form moving with terrifying speed. His eyes burned with fury as he raised a blade crackling with dark energy. The battle had become personal. Grant dove toward the warlord, his weapon raised. He couldn't let Amara fight alone. He couldn't let her carry the burden of this fight by herself. The two collided, Grant using every ounce of strength. He had to hold off the warlord's brutal strikes. The energy blade clashed against Grant's rifle, sending shockwaves through the air. He was outmatched, but he wasn't alone. Amara's flames lit up the sky as she fought alongside him, her power a shield against the Zorathians' deadly attacks. With one final surge of energy, Grant launched himself at Zorath, knocking the warlord off balance. Amara's fire flared, engulfing the warlord in an explosion of flame. The energy around them was blinding, and when the light faded, Zorath was gone, nothing but ashes scattered in the wind. The battlefield fell silent. The Zorathians had been defeated, but the victory came at a cost. Amara, exhausted from the battle, collapsed to her knees, her fiery glow fading. Grant rushed to her side, his heart pounding in his chest. "Amara, are you all right?" She looked up at him, a faint smile on her lips. "We did it," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with relief. He held her close, the weight of everything they had endured settling in. They had fought, they had won, and they had survived, together. But the fight wasn't over. The temple was still ahead, and there was so much more to do. The Zorathians were not the only threat to the galaxy, but for now, they had won a small but crucial victory. And as Grant looked down at Amara, her strength shining through even in her weakened state, he knew one thing for certain: they were ready for whatever came next. Together, they could face anything. A sacrifice for love. The battlefield had fallen silent, but the silence was deafening. The warlord was gone, his forces scattered, and the Zorathians' once mighty presence had been reduced to ash and ruin. But despite the victory, the weight of what had just transpired hung heavily in the air. Grant stood, holding Amara in his arms, the fiery glow around her now flickering weakly. She had fought with all her might, but the toll it had taken on her was evident. "We did it, didn't we?" Amara whispered, her voice faint, barely more than a breath. Grant nodded, his heart heavy with emotion. "Yeah, we did." But even as the words left his lips, something shifted. The temperature around them seemed to drop suddenly, and a faint tremor rumbled through the earth. Grant's eyes darted around, searching for the source of the disturbance. It wasn't over. The temple, still within reach, held the answers, but it also held something more dangerous, something Amara had warned him about. "We have to move," Amara said, her voice more urgent now. Despite her exhaustion, she tried to rise, but her body was too weak. "The Zorathians are not the only threat we face. The temple, it is the key, but it's also a test. It will either empower me or destroy us both." Grant's mind raced. What had she meant by that? She had spoken of the temple being a place of power, where the true force of her people could be unlocked. But now it sounded as if the temple held a dark secret, one that they were about to uncover. "Let's get to the temple, Amara," Grant said, his voice steady, but there was no denying the fear in his chest. "We don't have much time." With all his strength, he helped her to her feet, their bond more evident than ever. The struggle had only deepened their connection, making them stronger together. But as they moved forward, the ground beneath them seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as if the temple itself was alive, watching them, waiting for them. They'd reached the foot of the mountain, the entrance to the temple hidden behind ancient stones. The air here felt thick, charged with power. Amara's fiery glow flickered one last time, and for a moment she seemed to hesitate. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling. "Inside is where I will either embrace my full power or be consumed by it." Grant gripped her hand tightly, trying to reassure her. "We're in this together. Whatever happens, I'm with you." She nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips as she stepped forward. The moment they crossed the threshold of the temple, the atmosphere shifted. The air was heavy, filled with an ancient, undeniable presence. The walls were etched with symbols and markings that glowed faintly, their meaning long lost to time. The temple was vast. Its grandeur was awe-inspiring, but there was an eerie, cold emptiness to it as well. The deeper they ventured, the more it seemed like the very stones were alive, watching their every move. At the heart of the temple, they found what they had been searching for. A massive stone pedestal stood before them, bathed in a soft, ethereal light. Atop it, a crystal, glowing with the power of stars, waited. It was beautiful, radiant, but its energy felt dangerous, like a force waiting to be unleashed. "This is it," Amara whispered. "The source of our power." Grant could feel the weight of the moment, the fate of everything resting on this decision. But Amara's energy was fading. The fire within her was flickering, and the crystal's light seemed to call to her, beckoning her toward it. "I have to do this, Grant," Amara said, her voice soft. "It's the only way I can fully awaken my power. I have to sacrifice myself to do it. You can't stop me." Grant's heart sank. "No, Amara, you don't have to." "I do," she interrupted gently, her fiery eyes meeting his with a calm certainty. "This is the only way I can be truly free, truly strong enough to protect what we fought for. If I don't do this now, my power will consume me, and I'll lose control. The Zorathians, the galaxy, none of it will be safe." Grant felt a lump form in his throat. The woman he had come to trust, to fight beside, she was willing to give up everything for the greater good, for him. "Amara, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Don't do this. We've already sacrificed so much. I can't lose you. Not like this." She smiled, her fiery glow dimming ever so slightly. "I'm not leaving you, Grant. This is my choice, and it's one I make because I know you'll carry on. You've shown me what it means to fight for something more than just survival. You've shown me love, something I never knew I could have." Tears welled in Grant's eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. This was the moment where everything would change, where Amara's destiny would unfold. "I love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'll carry on. I'll never forget what we shared. You're not just the princess of the Infernians. You're my strength, and that strength will live on in me." Amara's eyes softened, and for a brief, fleeting moment, she stepped toward him. Without a word, she kissed him. A kiss full of love, full of everything they had been through together. Then, with a final, lingering touch, she turned back toward the pedestal. As Amara placed her hands on the crystal, a surge of energy erupted from it, engulfing her in a brilliant blaze of light. The fire that had burned so brightly within her now expanded outward, filling the temple with its intense heat. Grant shielded his eyes, but he could still see her silhouette through the radiant light, her body writhing in the surge of power. The ground beneath him shook, and for a moment, he feared the entire temple would collapse. But then, as quickly as it had begun, the light faded. The energy subsided, and standing before him, still glowing but now more serene, was Amara, changed. She was no longer just a princess. She had become something greater, an embodiment of fire and strength, her true power unleashed. Grant's heart swelled with a mixture of awe and sadness. The woman he had loved had made the ultimate sacrifice to protect everything they had fought for. And now she was reborn, stronger than ever. She looked at him, her eyes filled with an overwhelming love and gratitude. "We did it, Grant," she said, her voice full of both joy and sorrow. "We are free." And as they stood together, side by side, in the heart of the temple, they knew the galaxy would never be the same. The war was far from over, but they had given everything to secure a future for all. Their bond was unbreakable. And no matter what came next, they would face it together.